Can I say, first of all, thank you to the organisers of the conference. We're delighted to have been given the chance to come here today and talk to you, and I hope you find it useful. As Ada said earlier, I'm going to be describing a model of school rather than a specific school. There are 40 studio schools in the UK. They're all state funded. They're all mainstream schools. We do have one school here from Liverpool, but one of the key elements of studio schools is that they're designed to be flexible around their local labour market and their local socioeconomic background. But if I start off with some context for studio schools. So we go back to 1870, really, the mid-19th century, when compulsory education was introduced in England. And it was introduced for a variety of reasons, despite opposition from many people who thought educating the poor was a catastrophe. It was introduced because at the time, Britain was both the world's leading military and economic power. It's a long time ago, but it was true in the 19th century. People were very concerned about the success of the Prussian army. And Prussia had introduced compulsory education and had started teaching young people key skills. And that made for disciplined soldiers in a modern army who could follow instructions. And our generals are very worried about that, so they felt the education system had to change in order to allow the army and the navy to be modernised. That was one key driver. The main driver, though, was concerns from industrialists. Industrialists were saying, if we have a factory in Manchester and a factory in Liverpool, these factories are going to follow a common pattern, and we need to be sure that our workers are capable of operating the same machinery, whether it's in Liverpool or Manchester or Birmingham or wherever it was. So they actually made sure that, that they wanted workers who were literate, they could speak English, they could follow instruction, and to a lesser extent were numerate. The main thing, though, of those was people who could follow instruction. And what schools did in 1870 was they disciplined the Victorian working classes for life in factories, because that's what the labour market looked like. So this model of school that you see here isn't so very different from the model that we use now. People sit in rows, somebody stands at the front, a teacher, and passes information down. But that was designed for a 19th century labour market, not a 21st century labour market. So that model has evolved, but it's still recognisable from 140 years ago. We find that the link between education and what students are going to do post-education has been almost snapped. Schools and policymakers have forgotten that one of the key purposes of a state-funded education system is to prepare young people for life beyond school, and particularly life in work. They've got to have some form of economic utility, or you're wasting your very significant investment. In our case, schools are, and it's true here as well, I guess, driven by qualifications. Qualifications are seen as the key determinant on whether a school's effective or not. What percentage of young people pass specific exams? We're also a highly regulated school system as well, and that's stifled innovation. People recognise there's a need for change, but change is a very difficult thing to achieve in a regulated system. And I suppose the final thing here really, I suppose, is that disengagement levels amongst some groups of young people are very, very high, particularly amongst poor, white working class British students, and particularly boys. They've started to disengage from school because they don't see school as relevant to what they're going to do in the future. So that was our problem. So we tried to design a new type of school, but using very old ideas. Really the Renaissance idea that you could create a place where you could learn to work, but you could also learn how to live properly, the studio. So studio schools are small schools. We think 300 is about the optimum number. There's some evidence that small schools in the long run get better results for their students than very large schools. They're aimed at 14 to 19-year-olds, and we've gone for that age range because we wanted the schools to have an adult atmosphere. And a 14-year-old is a young adult, an 11-year-old or a 12-year-old is a child. So we didn't want to have 11 and 12-year-olds at the schools. As much of the school as possible, as much of the curriculum as possible, should be taught through project-based learning. We don't believe all of it can be taught through project-based learning, but a significant element of it can, and I'll come to that in a second. We want the students to have personal coaches, people who can mentor them in some of the key skills that they need beyond the merely academic. We've also called the teachers learning coaches, because we're trying to get across this idea this is coaching rather than teaching. It incorporates regular work experience, which I'll come to in a second. Meaningful qualifications. These, as Ada said, these are schools that are in the mainstream. They offer the same qualifications that you would get at any English school at all. The difference is that they're taught those qualifications in a slightly different way. And we wanted to develop employability skills, which I'll come to in a second. Project-based learning, I've only got 15 minutes or so I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but it has certain key features. It's got to be rigorous academically. It's got to be authentic. You've got to have applied uses for it. And you've got to assess what you're doing at the end of it. It's not just make up a project, hope it's interesting, and not map it to the needs of the learners. I'll just skip through this because of time. So our schools feature project-based learning very heavily, and sometimes that's work commissioned by employers, and sometimes it's work that the students themselves come up with. Work experience is a really, really important part of our model. So typically, when students get to 16, they do 2 days a week, 1 day a week in some schools, but typically 2 days a week with an external employer. So they're effectively a part-time employee. The 14 and 15-year-olds do 1 day every 2 weeks within that. And we think work provides really useful context for learning. Why is grammar important? Well, if you're in a workplace doing an email for somebody, you can actually understand why grammar is important. Why is geometry important? Why is it relevant? Anybody who's ever tried to lay a line of bricks will understand why geometry is important in the real world. Most importantly, perhaps, though, it's an induction into the adult world. We've increasingly, in our education system, treated young people as children way past the point where they actually are children. And one of the things we see at our schools is that our students, and I'm sure if Matthew and Dylan get a chance to speak today, you'll see this, display an emotional maturity that's greater than you typically find in young people their age. There's a very short video here of this employer saying what he wants out of the studio school.
Students on at the age of 14, give them work experience to then take them on as an apprentice, to then take them on to a permanent role in the future, train them to be a fully qualified accountant.
It's just a very short one. We've got a longer video later. So personal coaching, I mentioned personal coaching earlier. When you go to a studio school, you're allocated a personal coach, and typically you'll see that personal coach on a weekly or a fortnightly basis, and there'll be occasional ad hoc interaction with the personal coach. They track progress of these create employability skills, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and they look for development opportunities for the young people. They're often people who've had real world experience. They're usually not teachers, because most teachers go from school to university, back to school to teach. They have very little contact with the world outside. And we wanted to make sure that personal coaches could provide that experience inside the school. I mentioned the Create Skills Framework. So we have a skills framework that says, what are employers looking for? And we know that employers are looking for certain skills. They want emotional resilience. They want employees to have the ability to communicate. They want enterprising behaviour. So we've created a skills framework which is based around all of those competencies. And there's an assessment tool which allows you to track the sub-skills and the sub-skills that actually make up that particular framework. I thought, given how little time I had, it would be worth showing you just a 3 or 4 minute video. A few years ago, 2 years ago, we asked all of our schools to make a video explaining what their studio school was, what it meant to them. We asked them to do it with no help at all from the staff at the school or indeed any adults at all. And this entry here from Huddersfield, which was our first studio school actually, was the winning entry. So they'll describe to you what they consider a studio school to be.
Hi, I'm Talia, and before we begin, we would like to give you the story of the Creative and Media Studio School. The Studio School is a new concept of education born in 2010, and the first ever studio school opened all the way up in Huddersfield. Our studio school takes the traditional learning and teaching method out of the classroom and puts it in a creative, practical and enterprising atmosphere. Our studio school is a brilliant place where creative magic happens. Placements at the studio school are a key part of academic excellence. In the real world outside the big walls of the studio school, businesses and paying clients will not accept C's. A stars is the only acceptable outcome. All studio schools follow the Create framework, and this has been created to help students excel at their work. Personal coaching is a one-on-one meeting between a coach and a student that allows them to talk about the school life. It helps the students get more direction for their future career. Graham runs a youth marketing agency for young people between the ages of 14 and 19. Graham provides opportunities for students at the studio school to work with him on live projects for his clients. Not only do the students get the experience, but the work goes towards their coursework and they also often get paid, which is kind of cool.
Hi, I'm Chris and I'm a media student at the studio school. During my first year at the studio school, I used to work for Graham. Working for Graham, I used to make promotional films that would go towards his work with clients.
Hello, I'm Matthew. The studio school has helped me loads to build up my confidence, has given me the chance to expand my DJing company. Studying media with Mickey, my learning coach, and the rest of the team has given me a chance to be around like-minded people with the same passion as me. I felt a bit daunted by other colleges because I'm dyslexic and reading and writing really scares me. The relaxed and nurturing environment is a fantastic way for me to maximise my potential.
Hi, I'm Ruben, a fashion student at the studio school. I never thought I'd be working on a placement for a clothing company and conducting my own photo shoot. A big part of my time here was being able to direct a fashion show. All the subject areas came together to put on a brilliant showcase of the students' work. The graphic design students made the branding and promotional material, the media students filmed it, and the music students provided soundtracks and entertainment.
We even have Prince Andrew as an official patron of the studio school's trust. He visited us and gave enormous praise to both teachers and students and told us to not be afraid of making mistakes because that's just how we learn. The studio school family is growing every day with schools popping up all over the country, and we can't wait for you to join us.
I just want to show you that because I think it encapsulates really what we're trying to achieve. We think our education system is in crisis. Schools, by and large, are simply not fit for purpose. They've been designed to provide factory workers. They've been designed to provide people who are going to go into university. There's a middle path there for a lot of people that we think the studio schools can really help with. So we want them to leave our schools really with having had the chance to develop that combination of skills, work experience, real life experience, and meaningful qualifications that will allow them to thrive in the future. Thank you.